Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us this Saba Saba Day to commemorate and to help us think through what it means to not only celebrate the past, not only to think about what Saba Saba meant, that first Saba Saba, but also to think about what it means to us today and how it might influence us to change the future into the future that we want. We are really, really looking forward to the conversation that we have this afternoon. And we have a group of amazing, amazing Nairobians who are joining us to think about how justice, the city, which is the space that they live, and the power of the imagination all comes together. So I'm going to give you a chance to meet all of them in a minute. But before I do that, let me welcome my co-moderator, Abubakar Zain, to just say hello to everybody and any thoughts he has to start us off. Karibu, Zain.
Hello, everyone. How are you? As it is in Nairobi, I've just lost power where I am. So you can see I'm speaking with my phone with a silhouette. So good afternoon and welcome.
And we are going to just go straight into it because we do have an exciting program. And what I'm going to do is I am going to ask each of our participants, the ones who will be joining us on the call right from the beginning, to say good afternoon or however it is they want to greet you. And then we will just go straight in by, first of all, just doing a reflection on Saba Saba. So I am going to welcome them in the order that perhaps you will meet them when they speak, or just the order that they appear on my screen. Let me start by Margaret Aduto. Margaret is the program manager at Inuka Nisisi. Margaret, welcome.
Thank you, Mshe.
And then I have Bastian Schutz. Please feel free if you want to say a little bit more than just good morning or good afternoon and thank you. Though we will have plenty of an opportunity for you to talk to us afterwards. Margaret, do you want to add anything to that?
I think I'm good, Misha. You already introduced me. I'm a program manager at Inuka Kenya Nisisi Limited. I'll add on that as I speak.
Thank you very much. And then I want to invite Bastian Schultz. And Bastian is with FES-Kenya, and I'm going to take a leaf from Margaret and not tell you what they do at the organizations that some of them are at. I'll just give you the name. Bastian, I was going to greet you and welcome you in German, but let me try it this way. Karibu sana.
Thank you, Mshai. Feel free to try your German. Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Bastian. And as Mshai have said, I'm the country representative of the FES-Kenya office. And it's my first Saba Saba Day in Kenya since I've just moved to Nairobi in February this year.
And I look forward to hearing what you think about it as we go through and have our conversations on justice. Then I have Carol Nganga. Carol is coming to us, and I appreciate it. Even though we'll be talking about Nairobi, I think Carol is coming from elsewhere in Kenya, but she is very invested in what's going on in Nairobi. Carol, welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carol Nganga. I live in Nairobi, but I have run away from the cold for a week. So I am in Kilifi today, but I'm very happy to be having this conversation. I work for Msingi Trust, and we'll be having more conversations on that later. Asanteni sana.
Thank you, Carol. I also have with us Abubakar Said, and Abubakar Said is with Uraia Trust.
Thank you, Dr. Mushai. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so my name is Abubakar Said. I work with Uraia Trust as a civic education manager. And basically, my task is very simple. Just to look at the Constitution and see how I can really make it as simple as possible for the average Mwananchi to appreciate what it is and how it relates to his life. And just welcome to Nairobi. I want to welcome everyone to Nairobi. I'm sure the ones who are in Nairobi, a place whereby a cop can get his phone snatched when he's controlling traffic. Karibu.
I don't know if that's a welcome when that's the first thing that you say to us after that. Abaka, one of the things I always remember about you is a program that we might get to and talk about a bit later on, where everybody was introducing themselves in terms of their counties. And you are one of the few Kenyans in the room who said, I am from Nairobi County. Everybody else was saying, I live in Nairobi, but my home county is, and I always remember you for that. So you are a Nairobian, born and bred. Well, I don't know if you're born and bred, but definitely the city lives in your heart. And then we have Mike Kobole, and I'm calling him Kobole. I don't know if he wants to give us another name, but that's how everybody knows him. So Mike, welcome to the discussion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike, and I will go using the cue that was started by Abubakar Zain. I am an illustrator and a visual artist that works with several teams here, and especially when it comes to condensing information that is packed in this long, huge report. And also when I work with the Orature Collective, I work to kind of illustrate and, model their stories in a visual way. And more to my Nairobi identity, I'm a third generation Nairobi and nowhere else identity person since my grandmother moved here in 1926. And we don't have out of Nairobi home, as it were. So I'm Nairobi blood pure, 3 generations. So that's my
connection with Nairobi. And so we're off to what I hope will be a provocative conversation with a range of these different Nairobians. And you might be asking, why Nairobi? Why not anywhere else? And we will find that out as we go along. But before we go into the conversation on Nairobi, the conversation on justice, the conversation on citizen agency, and how that all comes together, I want to take you back to that first Saba Saba Day. Why do we commemorate Saba Saba? What meaning does it bear? Should we even be looking back into the past when we have so much that we're dealing with in the present, leave alone in the future? I'm going to do a short reading, which is an excerpt from a piece that was published in The Elephant, written by Kwamchetsi Makoha. And in it, he takes us back into time to that first Saba Saba Day, the piece itself. But then he also then brings us into the future. So I'm going to start. And for those of you who are in the webinar, I will give you the link to the piece itself, but close your eyes and travel back in time with me. Hands stretch out into the air, flashing the 2-finger V salute as the Toyota pickup truck with loudspeakers mounted on its roof careens over the curb and back onto the rutted road. That iconic image of Martin Shikuku, James Orengo, Philip Gashoka, and Rumba Kinuthia is etched in the minds of some 20 million Kenyans who are alive on the fateful day that marked the struggle for political pluralism in the country. The November 16, 1991 picture is a reenactment of what should have happened on July 7th, 1990, the day known by its Kiswahili translation, Saba Saba, in reference to the 7th day of the 7th month. The men perched atop the car had just changed vehicles when police shot at their tire in an attempt to stop them from entering the barricaded Kamkunji grounds on the rim of Nairobi River, which was darkened by sewage and grease, and whose smells fused with clouds of tear gas in the air. It had been 16 months since the first attempt to hold a rally at Kamkunji failed. On the gray, cold morning of Saturday, July 7th, 1990, reaching Kamkunji had acquired an urgency symbolizing a break in the dam of political repression. An attempted coup d'etat by junior Air Force officers 8 years earlier had floundered and given Daniel Arap Moi, only 4 years into his presidency, the excuse to turn the screws on all opposition. Dissent had been brewing in Kenya since Moi began consolidating political power by changing the constitution to ban multi-party politics and detaining critics, some of whom fled into exile. But the failed push emboldened Moi to take away judges' security of tenure and to blatantly rig the 1988 elections, which filled parliament with its lackeys. The lone government-owned radio and television service ruled the airwaves, alongside free newspapers who would not go to press until State House supplied its front page photograph of Moi, and whose editors regularly fielded calls from the president. In those days, Kenyans relied on the British Broadcasting Corporation's Kiswahili service to learn what was going on in their own country. 5 months prior to the planned Saba Saba meeting, Moi's foreign minister, Robert Ouko, had been brutally killed. Ouko's dismembered body was dumped on a hill in his rural constituency. It was widely believed that his murder had been planned by people close to Moi. Kenya was suffocating under the armpits of Moi's single-party regime. He held the bureaucracy and the security apparatus in a firm grip. Parliament sang his song, and the judiciary was cowed into sniveling subservience. He had declared debate on multi-party politics, stirred by clerics, closed even before it began. Open defiance seemed like the only channel for starting a national conversation. At its opening gambit, the Moi government declared the Kamkunji meeting illegal and arrested Kenneth Matiba, Charles Rubia, and Raila Odinga, 3 of the senior politicians who were organizing it, before subsequently detaining them without trial. Kenya was suffocating under the armpits of Moi's single-party regime. He held the bureaucracy and the security apparatus in a firm grip. Other countries confronted with dictatorship in Africa had gone the way of the muzzle with military coups d'etats. Kenyans put themselves on the line at the risk of permanently separating body from soul. The men on the pickup truck were the second-tier leaders, and there was another tier below them, and yet another, then another, across the length and breadth of the country. That movement, dubbed the Second Liberation, began to form in spite of restrictive laws on assembly and association, grouping people together in organizing cells. Saba Saba had been prefaced by the mysterious appearance of leaflets, secretly printed and dropped around the country, inviting people to the meeting. Relying on a network of football clubs and private sector transport workers traveling across the nation, people were put on buses to Nairobi for the day of confrontation. It put a match to the tinder that had piled across the country and exploded into 4 days of confrontation between the police and the public. The wall of fear had cracked. When national newspapers and the international media chalked up the tally, there were 39 dead, 69 injured, and over 5,000 arrested, with over 1,000 charged with looting and rioting. Saba Saba was the first serious organized challenge to repression through defiance. 16 months after Saba Saba, Moi grudgingly capitulated and agreed to term limits and to repealing constitutional bans on multi-party political organizing. Within months of the return to political pluralism, some 19 new political parties had been registered by dint of the efforts of state operatives who also engineered a split inside the Opposition Forum for the Restoration of Democracy Party. And so the story continues. We wanted just to start with a moment of reflection when we think about what we are going to talk about: social justice, citizens organizing, and what it takes to move to the next generation and into the future. So I'm going to just pause and ask Abubakar Zain if you have any quick thoughts on Saba Saba before I bring in Bastian and Margaret Aduto to bring us into the present and into what is going on now. Abaka?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mchai. I hope you can hear me. One of the things that we need to contextualize from that very graphic reading that you're given is that Kenya has a history that is colored by every time, and the subset of a lot of was done by many brave men and women of our nation and a lot of young people to reject an authoritarian system of a single party dictatorship and to agitate
Zain, I'm beginning to
for the introduction of multi-party politics in Kenya. You link this to some of the ideas about. Go ahead.
No, now I can hear you. Just go ahead. Go ahead, my brother. Okay, I think we have lost him. I could hear his, he was starting to cut in and out. Zain, can you hear us? Okay, I'm going to come back to Abubakar as soon as we have him back. But in the meantime, as we come back to it, he's going to bring us and just say a little bit about how we link that to where we are. But as I wait for him to come back, I'm going to just go straight to the first part of our conversation, in which we want to think about this link between justice, a space. In this case, we talked about how Saba Saba seemed to be very much around Nairobi, but the space that people live in, and also the question of citizen agency. And before I go into asking you just to tell us a little bit about what you're doing and your own thoughts about justice and citizen agency, Margaret and Bastian, I know that both of you are Nairobians who were not in Nairobi at the time of Saba Saba, and having joined us in the last few years, what might have been your thoughts in terms of what Saba Saba, just the reading that you heard, and just one or two things that perhaps came to your mind as you heard that, that reading? Margaret, Bastian, any of you who wants to go first, and then I'll come to the questions of justice and citizen agency. Margaret, shall I start with you?
Thank you, Mshai. I think for me, Saba Saba, I've been here 8 years now and counting. I think for me, my thoughts around Saba Saba is the loss of history, because the people I interact with, who are my peers, some of them older than me, most of them younger than me, do not have an idea of what Saba Saba is and why, why the noise around Saba Saba. I love to work with artists, and last year we tried to organize something around Saba Saba and just trying to, look at Saba Saba through the lens of the artists. And we realized that there's very little about, the artists in Saba Saba. And yet I think the artists were at the heart of Saba Saba. So I think the whole idea around history and the correct history and carrying it down, I think for me, it's something that really, really bothers me about Saba Saba. Thank you, Mshai.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And I'll come back to you a little bit later. But I wanted to go and ask Bastian the same question. And Bastian, I wonder if, as you do that, you could also just begin to reflect on the question of justice. Why is justice something you're so invested and committed to?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Mchai. I have to admit that your intervention, the reading, the 3-4 minutes reading, was actually very moving. And it somehow, although the context is much different, of course, but it somehow reminds me about my former home, my till February this year home, South Africa. And something that I have learned living in South Africa for almost 6 years and in Johannesburg, close to Soweto, is that remembering events of collective action, and I would like to call Saba Saba a moment, an event of collective action, it can be a source of hope. So that's my response to your question. That would be my first thought, that Saba Saba should be something to be proud of. But let me admit that on the day of Saba Saba, the original event, I was only 6 years old. And therefore, I somehow think I can speak, not necessarily for the newest generation, but for one of the rather new generations, that of course it is part of justice within societies, intergenerational justice, to remember and to engage oneself with events like that. I hope I do justice to your question. At the end of the day, it's actually quite moving listening to what you have read and what you have presented.
And I want to thank both of you because, the point of doing the reading was that, again, as I said, my mind was prompted by somebody who said, I'm a Kenyan, born, bred in Nairobi. Every time we do these Saba Saba commemorations, I know it's important. I know it's about social justice, but I really don't know what it's about. And so as we think about what it is, and I'm sure we'll come back to this. I know Zain had problems with power, so I'm hoping his power will come back. I want us to just focus our thoughts on this question of justice and what justice means in terms of the work that you're doing. And I know, Bastian, FES-Kenya has been doing a lot of really interesting work on not just justice in general, but justice in a space, which is the space, the urban space of the city. And I wonder if you could take some time just to talk us through what that looks like and what that, why justice in the city? Why a just city? Why not a just country? And what goes into justice, thinking about justice and the city?
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me start by saying good afternoon once again to, of course, the panelists, to the host, Dr. Mchai and Brother Sen, but also the attendees and those that are joining us through the live stream. Once again, my name is Bastian Schulz, and I'm the country representative of FES-Kenya, and I'm still quite new to Nairobi. I've moved from Joburg, from South Africa, to Nairobi in February this year. I've joined the team of FES-Kenya after 6 years in South Africa, and I've been working with the FES-Kenya team in the past, since my post in South Africa was more of a regional project. I was in charge of regional trade union work, and every time, and I have to admit that I used to be a very proud Johannesburg citizen. Every time I came to Nairobi, I called it the second coolest city in sub-Saharan Africa. And I always called Johannesburg the New York of Africa. And I would stick to calling Joburg the New York of Africa. But my perception with regards to what's the coolest city in sub-Saharan Africa is changing. And Nairobi is almost on the top of that list. At least it's now officially in my passport. So Dr. Mchai, you don't have to invest more energy in making me a Nairobi citizen by heart as well. I'm almost convinced. Just a brief remark with regards to what FES does. For those that might not know the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, we are a private and non-profit organization, and we are committed to the ideas of social democracy. And we work for social justice, for democracy, for peace, but also international solidarity here in Kenya, in more than 25 offices on the African continent, and in over 100 country and project offices around the world. And we strive, I myself, together with, of course, my team in Nairobi, we strive to enable and strengthen social justice and democratic political participation. Together with young people, we develop ideas for shaping a better future, but we also act towards strengthening the representation of workers' interests by means of political education and international networking. And the overall focus of our work in Kenya is to support progressive political, social, and economic processes in society. So, Mchai, we work on justice at many places, at the societal level, at the workplace, at the shop floor. But why do we have an interest in urbanization? Why does an organization like the FES have an interest in urbanization? And why do we try our very best to support our partners to push for what we call just city in Kenya to become a reality? As most of you will know, urbanization is one of the major trends shaping the African continent. And Africa's urban population will double over the next 25 years. And by 2040, which is almost around the corner, by 2040, a majority of Africans will be living in cities. It's going to be over 1 billion people in cities in Africa alone. But so far, or thus far, however, populations have been mostly born or coming into unjust cities, which were often founded in colonial times and in which historical inequalities have been further compounded by what I would call neoliberal urban policies. Public goods, one of our main focus. Public goods are scarce commodities in African cities, and access to them most often depends on the material condition of its citizens or the city dwellers. That is something that I would call very, very unjust. Most African city dwellers live in informal settlements. They work under precarious conditions, mostly in the informal sector, and they do not have access to social protection schemes and various public goods, be it housing, be it transport, or be it health services. And I would say that the lack of access to various public goods is not only unjust, but it's also one of the main reasons for deepening poverty and inequalities. And therefore, urbanization in Africa, in Kenya, is clearly a catalyst of various inequalities, and this needs to change. In Nairobi, for example, over 60%, and I'm sure most of you know that, but over 60% of the population lives in informal settlements that account for less than 10% of the city's total area. In contrast, the national and international elite often lives in closed-off compounds protected by private security services, and they have access to almost all the public goods, but most often they are privatized. So in addition, cities around the world are already responsible for more than 70% of all CO2 emissions. But much of the necessary urban infrastructure in Africa has not yet been built. And it's unclear how, by whom, under what conditions, for whom, and especially with what kind of energy supply this infrastructure should and will be built. So I would say there's a great potential here for African countries to actively shape this future. But there's also an immediate need for international and national policy to focus more on African cities, because so far they've mostly been neglected. And in the last couple of years, the focus of international and national policies was more on smart cities, or so-called smart cities. And this is something that we would like to change. And against this background, the concept of the just city in Kenya, but also in other countries on the continent, serves somehow as the counter narrative to the smart city idea and is built on 4 conceptual pillars. It is built on dignity, on equity and diversity, on rights and responsibility, and of course on democracy. And here also another dimension of justice comes in, since the political fight against inequality in Africa is automatically becoming an urban one. Urban struggles are gaining traction, and I can see that on a daily basis in Nairobi, and unfortunately I had to see it on a daily basis in Joburg and the townships around Johannesburg. Excuse me. Millions of city dwellers are trying to make their own voices heard, and I'm sure that Margaret is going to talk about that right after me. Not only in Kenya, but rather across the continent, it therefore seems that living in the city is already gaining importance in the formation of political identity, especially in younger generations, even those that are younger than myself. And therefore, it might not be the strike in the factory. It might rather be the threat of forced eviction in a slum to make way for a road or an expressway. It might be the lack of affordable and safe public transport, the lack of housing opportunities, or a hike in fees for privatized drinking water that will drive political mobilization in the future. And we think as FES that what is clearly missing is a feasible long-term social urban development policy that is combined with new ideas for socially just and ecologically sustainable economic paths that are then creating prospects for the increasing number of precarious urban dwellers and what we call urban invisibles, the millions of urban invisibles in cities on the continent. And we think that such a discussion must go beyond ambitions to simply build African imitations of Dubai or Singapore, what I would call the showcase smart cities, but they are unable to provide enough housing, transport, and jobs for the majority of their own city's population. And that is why, in order for the unjust city, like Nairobi, to become a just one, economic and urban planning decision-making processes need to involve citizens more than ever to deliberate on the issues that affect them from the municipal level to the national level. Active involvement, from my point of view, has to do with voices being heard. But in order for those voices to be heard, it first of all needs them to be raised. And that needs alliances, it needs coalitions to be formed and built, it needs inequalities to be identified and tackled. And in order to do so, collective action is needed. So it's about voice and action. It's about voice and agency. And that's what we as FES think is needed in order to make unjust cities more just. And I'm about to conclude, but I'd like to briefly talk about scenarios because they can be one tool in order to create the foundation for collective action. And 4 possible future scenarios for the city of Nairobi, based on different understandings of justice, of power, and ideas, have been created. They may all inform different ideas, policies, and visions in creating the city we want for the future, but they were developed by a diverse team representing all social classes and strategic urban actors in Nairobi. The so-called scenario building team was led by the Orature Collective, to whom I am, to whom my predecessor Henrik, and to whom we as the FES-Kenya and the Just City Working Group are grateful for also now taking the next steps of inspiring debate and imagination to enrich and perhaps guide discussions on what kind of actions are needed towards attaining the best case scenario, which is called the Green City. And without giving you too much information about what the Green City is, I would say it could be an example for what a just city could look like. And of course, the concept of the just city has to be located in the constitutional, the policy, the legislative, the institutional and social context. But what better day to discuss all of those than on Saba Saba Day here in Kenya? The struggles for increased democratic spaces, for the provision of quality and adequate public goods and services, for public participation in shaping citizens' development, and for many other personal freedoms have greatly benefited from the Saba Saba movement, among others. The Kenyan Constitution now does guarantee these demands in various chapters and articles, including Article 43 on public goods. So finally, what kind of city do we aspire for? Just as the previous Saba Saba struggles, and therefore once again, Dr. Mashai, for giving us almost first-hand experience into what has happened almost a bit more than 30 years ago. Just as the previous Saba Saba struggles and demands were maintained by citizen involvement, alliance building and solidarity, then for the future of Nairobi, of this beautiful city, of this almost coolest city on the African continent, for the future of Nairobi to be just, it will require, I would say, the same efforts. And the 4 scenario stories and the Just City principles that I've briefly talked about can be great tools to help us imagine what kind of a city do we aspire to and take the necessary action to achieve it. And therefore, we as FES, myself, but of course my team, we do invite you to engage with those principles, engage with us, share the ideas of how we can all work together to achieve a just Nairobi, and at the end of the day, create more just cities in Kenya in general. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't speak for too long, but those are some thoughts about why we as FES, why myself have such a strong interest in making unjust cities more just.
Thank you very much. You've really laid out so much for us to think about. First of all, I really, really appreciate the fact that you've reminded us that often we get caught up with all the things that really, really drive us crazy about Nairobi. And you've reminded us that these issues are not all unique to us, that all over the world, but right here in Africa, other people are struggling with that. I really also appreciate the reminder that you've given us that there are people already doing something about it. And indeed, one of the reasons that we thought we would start with what FES-Kenya is doing is that FES-Kenya has brought together very many players from different people who think, people who act, people who are dreaming, people who are planning, all into different teams, if I want to put it that way. And so that you begin to see the many different possibilities of commitment and of engagement. And around very strong principles, people know why they're doing what they're doing and what's the vision and the different things that they're committing to. And then, of course, I also really wanted to appreciate the fact that while it is citizens, we as Kenyans must drive what happens to Nairobi. Everybody living in Nairobi, all Nairobians are going to be part of it, either the problem or part of the solution. And so I'm really happy to hear that you are committing to be part of that particular solution. I want to go to Margaret, and then I'm going to ask Zain, who's listening to both of you, who might want to bring a few things to bring them up after that. The other thing, Bastian, I do want to thank you also, is that we will be talking about this journey of imagination, this journey of collaboration that we've been working on in terms of scenarios, and how we come to start to think about what is the city we want to live in. But before I do that, Margaret, Bastian talked a lot. He kept using this term of people coming together. He talked about agency. He talked about, these things are not going to just happen, right? We often sometimes sit back and we say, there's a reason we have a county administration. There's a reason we've had city mayors and different things happening. There's a reason there's a government. We all have our lives. We've got things to do and places to be. Why do you guys say Nisisi? What is this investment in? Citizens must do it. Don't we have enough on our shoulders already? Margaret.
Thank you, Mshai. I think I'll start by saying, for me, a just city is necessary because of the existing social inequalities and the injustices that we're experiencing today. And for me, a just city would be one that is responsive to people's needs and not reactive in nature. And for me, a just city is a city where the structural causes of most of the things that ail us are addressed. I'll just speak about citizen agency and the work that Inuka is doing through the Sauti Yetu program to speak to the aspect of citizen agency and why citizens need to take actions to change their own situations and not wait for somebody else to come and do it for them. So maybe by way of introduction, Inuka Kenya Nisisi Limited is a social movement organization that is currently empowering citizens to improve their lives and demand for good governance. And I think for us, our priority approach has been through the social movement building. And through the Sauti Yetu program or initiative, which is directly, I think, my Kiswahili is not the best, but it could be translated into our voice. And in our case, it's the citizen's voice. It is a civic engagement initiative that encourages communities to exercise their democratic rights and engage elected leaders through creating non-partisan spaces to discuss local issues and create healthy relationships between the local people and the people, quote unquote, at the top, who are our leadership. So just trying to create that linkage. So currently we are implementing the Sauti Yetu program in 6 constituencies in Nairobi, and our focus is on the informal settlements. I think in the city, these are the places or spaces that are the margins of this city. So looking at Mathare, Ruaraka, Kamkunji, Dagoretti North, Kibra, and Embakasi South, looking at the informal settlements that either little or no attention is being directed towards them. And for me, I think it starts with the person, the empowerment of the person to know what they need to do to change their situation. And for Sauti Yetu, for us, the starting point is really enhancing. I don't want to say building the capacity. I think everybody and every human has capacity, but I think we need a little push to realize that we have the capacity to change our situations and to move things. So we enhance the capacity of local communities, and our focus is on community-based organizations who understand their realities on the ground. So we enhance their capacities to mobilize and organize for community dialogues between themselves and the elected leadership. And the focus is really on service delivery issues, the very basics of life. So issues around water, issues around garbage collection, issues around sewage, the very, very basics. Issues around security, issues around access to water. Those are the things that we try to emphasize, but they emerge from the communities. And you have the communities coming together to identify, prioritize, and follow through their own issues that they think, if improved, it will make a difference in their lives. And so after a training to be able to mobilize communities and the leadership, the communities and relevant leaders come together and they have a dialogue. You know, it's a discussion between the people and the people that they put in power to fix their situation. And it is also an opportunity to get feedback on what the government or the system is doing to fix some of the things that they're identifying as key priority areas. So I think in terms of the approach, the Sauti approach, we've seen a bit of success, especially where the communities themselves are able to do things for themselves. For example, during the joint community forums that brings together the communities and the local leaders, people volunteer to form part of a community action group. And basically the role of this community action group is to pick up the issues that the communities have identified and follow them through with relevant duty bearers, relevant authorities for action. And we've witnessed success in some areas where the communities themselves have decided we need this, and this has to happen, or they even give ultimatums sometimes. So for me, thinking about citizen agency, I am looking at the ability of the citizens to take charge, one of their decision-making processes, but also take charge of what happens within their communities. So linking their decisions to action, basically. And maybe I'll just wrap up by saying that for me, I think we basically just have to be human enough. If only we can be human enough, I think the issues around a just city can be fixed. I think it's the human aspect of it that we need to clutch on to be able to have a just city. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And some of the threads I'm picking up, I really like the way you ended by talking about this idea of, at the end of the day, it's about humanity. It's about what is the humane thing to do. I also liked that, you know, both of you seem to be emphasizing that it is about service delivery. We started about talking about that first Saba Saba, and a lot of it seems to be, many people, it's about the politics. The emphasis there was on the politics. It was on the big picture of the nation. And now we're coming down and you're saying it's about how that big picture, those big agendas, the politics at the national level, what impact it has in people's local communities, where they live, in the challenges that they are facing. I also loved the thing that you brought about people coming together to have conversations. And it's not just all people alike, but they're having conversations with public servants, with service, you know, people who are responsible for delivering that service and then staying committed. And the term you used was the follow through, that you don't just come in once, but you're able to keep going back and back and back again because you're working with other people. And sometimes when we try to do these things on our own, you just get tired. You know, you write or you agitate or you do whatever. And then one day you say, you know what, I'm done. But when there's a group of you working together, you can follow through. Abubakar Zain, I'm happy to see that you are back. What are some of the thoughts that are coming to your mind as Bastian and Margaret speak? And if you have maybe a quick question or comment for them, I'd love to hear that before I bring in the others.
Yes, there are a number of things that I think are very important that have come through the presentation by Bastian and Margaret. But what I would like to contextualize is that some of these principles we talk about, what a just city, what principles should a just city be founded upon. For Kenyans, we have had a long discussion about this and we have constitutionalized them. They are in our Article 10. And I would like to say that if you look at the way we formulated Article 10, and it's not just Article 10, they appear throughout the Constitution, but they are located in Article 10 as principles and values that should be applied for not only a just city, but the whole nation. That's why we call them national values and principles of governance. And there are 4 sets of them. The first one, if you look at 10.2, it talks, the first set in A talks about patriotism, national unity, sharing and devolution of power, and the rule of law, democracy, and participation of the people. Already in that category, you see participation of the people and the rule of law and democracy are recurring themes in our constitution. But if you go to B, which is now the heart of the principles and values under which a city should be built, one is human dignity, and that's why when we talk about hadhi ya kila binadamu, human dignity, equity, social justice, inclusiveness, equality, human rights, non-discrimination, and protection of the marginalized. And then if you go to C, we have good governance, integrity, transparency, accountability. And lastly, in D, we have sustainable development. You'll also realize that we have put some of these principles are repeated in the Bill of Rights. For example, on the first one, which is human dignity. And then the second one is found in Article 43 in terms of basic needs are basic rights for citizens. So what are we saying basically? We are saying that for those cities that were built on a template that was unjust, after coming into, after the constitution coming into effect, they needed to change almost 360 degrees in terms of saying, how do we address the injustices of the past on which our cities were built? That is one challenge. The other challenge is, because of devolution, all these new cities and new towns growing because resources are now coming through a devolved system of government, cannot build new towns or new cities or develop small towns into large ones without taking into account these principles. So these principles must be at the heart of making our towns and our cities grow, but making our towns and our cities be based on values. In other words, we need to prioritize people and not things. Prioritize citizens and not cars. So in a sense, these are the values. For Kenyans, we don't even need to debate about what are the values for a just city. They are in our constitution. What we need to do are 4 things. 1, we need to first take stock of the inequalities and injustices that exist in our current cities. 2, that we must then imagine a different world that is possible, that we can build this new world based on these values. And then 3, invest in the majority of the people in the city. So if you take Nairobi city, for example, and look at its old investment patterns, you will see that the investments are skewed towards the richer part of Nairobi, where the leaders are staying, the leafy suburb, if you like. So if you compare, for example, how much is invested in the informal settlements and these other richer places, there is complete inequality. And our constitution and the idea of a just city requires us to flip that investment paradigm and start investing where the majority of the people are. And the majority of the people of Nairobi are poor people. They're not rich. So you cannot continue investing in rich areas and leave the majority of the people without proper investments. And that is required through participation, through democracy, through the principle of equality and equity, which are all in our constitution. And lastly, and I'll finish with a question to both of them. Lastly is the idea that there are some things that are outlawed by the constitution and the law, and they still continue to bog us in terms of our desire and aspiration to attain a just city. And this is corruption and misgovernance. So I would like if both Bastian and Margaret could comment on the question of what are some of the things that we can learn from either working with communities or working globally on cities on the question of corruption and misallocation of resources. Thank you.
So Bastian, would you like to go, and then Margaret?
That's a tough question, Zain. If I would have the answer to this question, I would simply do it, and then more and more cities would become more just. I would give it a try by responding the following way. I mean, you've talked about corruption and the misallocation of resources. And I would say one must start with acknowledging that the majority of city dwellers, what I've called the urban invisibles, are the ones that are worst affected by corruption and the misallocation of resources. And as I've said, I don't want to talk too much about the city that I lived in for almost 6 years, but in Soweto, service delivery protests happened every second or third day. And they were centered around the same kind of issues, different context, but it was corruption and lack of public goods and lack of service delivery. But somehow the political elite, and I have to be a bit careful what I'm saying, but they got used to it. So the society itself got used to people going on service delivery protests every second, third, or fourth day. So what they had to do, they had to turn towards violence, and they had to use violent means, and they had to set buildings on fire. And that, of course, won't help. And therefore, the challenge, the political challenge for civil society, for all of us, is to find the balance between making voices heard and getting used to the fact that there are a bunch of rich people and the vast majority of poor people, and simply accept that for a fact. I'm sure I didn't answer your question, but as I've said, if I would have the answer right here in my hands, I would spend my time outside of Zoom meetings and simply get it done. But I think it starts with acknowledging that those worst affected by corruption and the misallocation of resources are the majority in cities, and they need to have political representation. And in order to do and to get that, they need to raise their voice in, if possible, peaceful means or peaceful ways.
Margaret?
Thank you, Mshay, and thank you, Zain, for the question. I'll attempt to respond based on our experience working with the communities. It may not be the best response, but I think it does work. I think for me, on the question of corruption and misallocation of resources, it's the whole idea around information sharing and breaking this information in the language that the citizens understand, in the language that the citizens can connect with, just translating. Most times corruption is in big numbers and big figures with many zeros. And some people don't even have an experience of those zeros. So it's just being able to break down those zeros into a language that a local person or the citizens can understand, and also providing alternatives. So communicating the fact that if this amount of money is misused, this is what it could have done in your community. And this is how you could have benefited, first as an individual, but also then as a group. So just trying to take what is private and make it public. And then also taking that is public and making it private. I think for me, in the areas that we're working with, is something that has worked. Because when people know the budget allocations for the specific service delivery areas in their communities, they are then able to hold the responsible or the relevant duty bearers to account when that money does not do what it was supposed to do. I think the other thing is really providing a sense of direction. Most people know there is corruption or money is being misused, but they do not have a sense of direction. They do not know how do we begin to tackle this issue, or where do we go to, who do we report to, and if we report, how secure are we? Won't we be exposing ourselves? So I think it's speaking to that sense of direction, so that then people have options. And when you do that, then people lose the fear. Because for corruption in the communities and, exposing corruption among the citizens in informal settlements is the intimidation, the gatekeepers, the arrest. It's the aftermath that is brought before, the action. But if people are aware that there are options and there are people who will be able to stand behind them and support them, then they're able to do something about it. But the other bit is really just a choice to say, you know what, we're tired. This just can't continue. And we've had people staging protests, planting plantains on, a road that has potholes and saying, this road is impassable. And there was money that was supposed to repair or do this road. It hasn't done it. It's just not possible. We've had people taking actions, bringing down, wall fences of land that is being stolen. They know it is school property, this public land, somebody is trying to appropriate it, and the wall comes down, So sometimes it was just, rallying behind the citizens and just assuring them that, when such a scenario happens, we are behind you, If it is the publicity you need, if it's the advocacy, if it's the legal support, these are the options that you have and at your disposal. And I think with that, we've seen lots of progress, especially with public resources, where people know this money is for this community. It's supposed to do this, and people are able to follow through. But I think for me, the key thing is really the information sharing. Because when people don't know, then there's very little they can do about it. And then corruption is normalized because you have no idea, you don't know what's happening in your community. You don't even know when and how the resources are allocated or supposed to be used, or who is supposed to be in charge. If you do not know, there's very little that you can do. So I think for Inuka, we've invested so much in civic education. So just teaching the communities the roles and responsibilities of the different service bearers, right from the ward administrator, the sub-county administrator, up to the MCA. What are their roles? What are their responsibilities? But also as a citizen, what is your role and responsibility in relation to service delivery in your specific area? Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. And you remind me of this quote. I was actually looking for it as you were speaking, by Frederick Douglass, who said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." Find out just what people will submit to, and you will have found out the exact amount of injustice and wrong which will be imposed on them. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. Bastian, you made a really important point that, look, at a particular point, people can get so frustrated, they feel that the only other place they can go to is violence. And really what we want to be able to do is to get to a point where the words are enough, where when citizens speak out, when people living in communities say, this is what we want, this is important, let's work together, then public servants are responsive so that you don't have to get to the point of violence. I'm very aware as I say this, that I know that even today, some of the people who went out for Saba Saba demonstrations have been arrested. And so we really need to be able to come to a point where as citizens, as people living in communities, as Nairobians, we're able to get into conversation and we are able to avoid violence so that we can have a better city. I want to bring in the others, to bring in Carol, Abubakar, and also Mike. But before I do that, And as I ask Margaret and Bastian just to take a moment and do some thinking as they listen to what the others are saying as well, and perhaps we'll be able to bring you in. There are a couple of questions that have come in. John Namai speaks to the question of networks. And also both of you have talked about, we have groups and teams that we're working with. So I wonder if you could just very quickly answer two questions. One, in terms of networks. Bastian, you talked about others in the rest of the continent are doing things, and it's very interesting to hear you speak about what's also happening, particularly in Johannesburg. So if people are interested in plugging in and perhaps finding networks with other countries, and Margaret, you can also respond to this if you also have these, how might we also network with others who are dealing with the same issues in the other spaces that they're in? And Margaret, I also want you to think about, I know Inuka also works outside Nairobi. Bastian, I don't know if the FES programs are also in other cities apart from Nairobi. So are there ways that we can network and connect with other cities, other countries, and learn from them? And then secondly, both of you have talked about working with teams. If somebody is listening and they are interested in plugging in, Margaret, I'm thinking about, I want to be in a group like that, but out of the places that you mentioned, my community is not there. Could you guys help me either start a similar program in my community? And if I am in an area where you already run a program, could you tell me how I could plug into that? And the same question for Bastian. So first of all, networks outside Nairobi in other spaces so that people can connect, and even people living in, maybe outside Nairobi or in another country can begin to connect. And then secondly, how do I plug in today? If after this call, this webinar, I want to immediately start to work with your teams. How do I do that? Let me start with Bastian again, and then Mark.
Okay, I've just responded to one of the two questions in the chat. Yes, we do work with other cities in Kenya. We are in touch for quite a number of years already with the city of Kisumu, where we are trying to make a bus park more just. Sometimes it's the small things. It's a newly restructured or yet to be built bus park that has to be more just and not simply speak to the interest of the market. And we've also started to work with the still to be announced, or the soon to be announced, the city Nakuru. And that is also a very good example to answer your second question, Dr. Shai. If you want to get in touch with us, then you can check our website. It's kenya.fes.de. You can check our Twitter account, FES-Kenya, or you can try to follow us on Facebook and simply drop us an email. You can drop me an email, and then I'll get you in touch with the respective team members, because the Just City is just like an umbrella for what we do. We have very, very active working groups that deal with the city of Kisumu and socially just public transport. On the other hand, we are already engaged in housing, issues around housing, affordable housing. And there's many more topics centered around different struggles for public goods and service delivery. So the response to the second question might be a rather boring one, but simply get in touch with us. You can either use the website, the Twitter account, and then I would link you up with the team members that are responsible for those respective projects. And we could easily invite you to the various working groups. One of the very few advantages of the current way we work is that being invited to a virtual gathering is much easier than getting invited to a physical meeting. So if there's somebody around that represents a civil society organization or a city dweller that has an interest in socially just public transport, I'm quite sure we could link him or her up with the right people. And as you've said, getting plugged in indirectly.
Thank you very much, Bastian. I know you will be having to run off at some point in another meeting, but we really do appreciate what you've both you're sharing in terms of the concept of a just city, and also the contacts and allowing people, if you really want to be able to get in touch and plug in on how to do that. I hope you'll stay as long as you can. And if there are any questions, I'm encouraging, if you have questions and you're in the webinar with us, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And if you are following us on YouTube, just put it in the comments. And if there's any question for Bastian, I'm sure he'll be able to answer it even in the chat before he leaves, and I'll read it out if we come to the Q&A time and he's already left us. But thank you very much. Margaret, I know you will stay with us until the end. So let me come to you and give you a chance to tell us how we can plug in.
Thank you, Mishai. I think starting with networks, I am not too sure I would have been able to do what we've been able to do without networks. So networking and partnerships is at the heart of what we do. Our entry point is really the community-based groups. So those small groups doing their small things, making a difference in their community, usually that is our entry point. But also we have collaborations with civil society organizations who are in the social justice, governance, and leadership field. So most times we work with their existing networks to the extent possible, especially where there's need for collaboration during trainings, during facilitations, but also during the implementation of the actual activities like the community dialogues. So for example, for the joint community forums, it's the community-based organizations whom we train who then mobilize and organize for that. And they're the ones who facilitate the session. So they're really at the heart of the work that we do. For getting in touch with us, I think one, if you are in the areas that I mentioned, we are also in Garissa and Nakuru with the same Sauti Yetu initiative. So if you're in those areas, it's just to identify if you're in the specific wards, we'll link you up with our NICC coordinators on the ground, but also with the community action groups in those specific areas, and that way you can directly plug in. We've had cases where the establishment of the community action groups is demand driven. So like, for example, the guys in Mukuru, they hear about this initiative and then they demand for it. So if there's demand, that is something that we can facilitate in whatever location that you are for the initiative to be implemented. In terms of reaching out, I think the NICC website, but also a direct email to info@inukakenya.com will be able to get back to you, and we can explore the possibilities for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And I encourage people to also put in any questions for Margaret as we continue. And now I want to bring in the three who have been waiting patiently. I'm going to bring you in terms of alphabetical order, but I'm going to ask all of us just to start with the same question. We've listened to organizations that are very invested in the concept of a just city and have been, are working not just in Nairobi, but elsewhere in the country in terms of organizing and working with community-based organizations, teams of people in different places, and really invested in working in those areas. But we also really wanted to listen to people, to individuals, to people who have said, this is my responsibility to do something about changing the spaces that I live in being committed in working in them. And some of you work with organizations and some of you don't, or do this work even outside your organization. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, just tell me a little bit about your heartbeat, your passion for the work of social justice in an urban space. And then the other thing I know all of you are part of, and this is how we invited you as the three of you, there were many others perhaps we could ask the same question to, is all three of you are part of the program that Bastian talked about, which was thinking about the future and a just city. And I'm going to ask Abubakar Zain to say a little bit more about that and why it was important to bring people together to talk about that. But before he does that, why don't we hear from you? Who are you? Why does Nairobi mean so much to you? Why would you take time out of everything you do to participate in yet another additional program where you're networking with other people who are coming together with this vision? So I'm going to start with Carol. No, I'll start with Abubakar. Abubakar is the A. Let me start with Abubakar, then I'll come to Carol, and then I'll come to Mike. Abubakar, karibu sana.
Thank you, Dr. Mishai. Thank you very much. yeah, why the passion? Um, I I guess as an Nairobian, I think what I can remember from an early age was that I remember I went to visit a friend when I was in primary school, and he was staying somewhere. Now, if people know Kibra, there's a place called Kisumundogo, and at that young age, I think I was around 8 years, I could not believe that there's this other side of the world whereby even to access someone's house, it was like walking a tightrope, the meandering and the maneuvering and just reaching that place was mind-boggling. I mean, I remember their house was sort of in like on a cliff basically. So it's just, so it's like, people are staying like this. It was amazing for me, and yeah, and I think it struck a big note in my life that, okay, fine, you can have what we call a normal house. From the side where I was coming from, and then places which are really strange to me, and of course, I came to know it's about resources. And what is interesting is that actually when I went there, because that friend of mine was actually my neighbor, and then I think the dad lost a job and they had to move out. So the way you used to go after school, we used to go to his place, just to watch TV here and there. So that time I needed to go to this new place. So I think that's now where I learned that we have different worlds, and yeah, we have different worlds. People are not living the same, and you're in the same city, same neighborhood, but the access to basic services are not what normally you think everybody gets. And I think it propelled me into my life into social justice, even from a young age. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Abubakar, because sometimes people look at you and they say, he works for civil society organization. He's paid to do this. And it's really wonderful to hear that actually the work, the job, the profession came because you were so invested in that. Wait a minute, there's something wrong. We live in the same town. I've always assumed everybody's experiences are like mine. And look, it's not. And I need to be involved in getting to do something about it. Thank you, Abubakar. We'll come back to you in a moment and let's expand a little bit more on that. Carol, where did you come from to bring you to this place?
Well, it's so good to be here. For me, I want to take myself back to the first time I saw someone being beaten for what they believe in. And I still remember from Great Wall TV, seeing Reverend Timothy Njoya being beaten by armed officers as they were struggling for multi-party democracy. And so for me, if I'm asked what my first Saba Saba memory is, it is of the Reverend Timothy Njoya fighting, being beaten, because actually he was not fighting, he was being attacked and beaten. And so wanting to find out why he would be beaten, why he would put himself in harm's way, him and others, why that would happen has now become a life's journey. But then also, I remember, in the story of Nairobi, I remember the one day I realized that we are poor, that I come from poverty, was when I joined, I come from Dagoretti South. And it's always very interesting when you listen to stories of Nairobi that Dagoretti South does not feature. But being a rural urban setting, it's really rural, but it's close to Nairobi. And so there are very many social complexities that come from there. And I coming from Dagoretti South, went to a public primary school. I loved it. And I knew that I was poor when my dignity was questioned when I joined a public high school that was public-private in a sense. And so my passion about Nairobi comes from my experiences of being different in the city that is meant to be your city, but then you don't belong to the city. It's you don't have access to the services, you don't have access to, you have to constantly fight to belong to the city. I remember my mother consistently looking for scholarships so that I can go to school. And I'm lucky I got to study. There are others who fight and don't get to study. You fight losing battles. And so my passion is because I realize that dignity is not negotiable. We've made the city and we've made this country a place where we negotiate for our humanity, and we negotiate. And the currency for this negotiation is proximity to power and wealth. And so when we ask Jiji nila nani, the answer is Jiji nila wenye pesa. It's for the politicians. It is not for us. It is not for, and so it's not for us. And so the reason why I do the work that I do is because I know what it is to be the first person in your community, in your family, to be the first one with a degree, because that's me. But I also know that there is access, that there is life beyond poverty. There's life beyond ownership of the city. And I am here because at that time, public utilities worked. And so right now, when the public is not working, what does it mean what would it have meant for me then when the public utilities are now very down? And so I do this, and the other connection to why I'm here, because I started an organization called Msingi Trust, where we make the connections between two of my passions, activism, advocacy, and faith, and realizing that many of our faith traditions have justice at the core of their belief system, yet we don't ignite or advocate for justice to be exemplified by faith systems, or for justice to be by faith systems. And so I have put myself in at this center where I am connecting the worlds of activism and faith, so that we can all create a just city, we can create a just world, we can have dignity that's not preferential, because we are all
Well, thank you, Carol, for sharing. And that the real power of, when you talked about being in a space where, yes, we're all supposed to be the same, but your dignity, where even as a young person, my dignity is not being weighed as being, my humanity seems to be less worth than other people's humanity in this space. I remember, and this is jumping the gun, but I remember when we were doing, as part of this process, and we did one of our sessions at Garden Estate primary school, which is the public-private kind of the public schools. And so many of the people who came for that workshop, who had gone to public schools in other parts of Nairobi, could not believe that that was a public. And people were like, wait, how is it possible that this is a public school by Nairobi, by the same Nairobi County, that's also responsible for the public school that I went to or my children went to? And this difference in the way that even public services are consumed and how they are who is deemed to be worth, and even who are they planned for. So thank you very much for that, Carol. Mike, I know when we had this conversation and, it was like, okay, I am part of you guys, but then, I don't really work for an organization. I work for I'm an artist. I work for myself. I work with many different organizations, but you are a Nairobian, and you're also somebody who is very proud of not just, you told us that you have several generations who've been in the city for you, and you have generations that you are responsible for, the next generation who are living in this city. Share with me some of your thoughts on what that means.
Thank you very much, Mshai. First off, I think I want to start with a very small, because I want this to be the first thing that I say. Margaret has mentioned something about that we don't understand concept, and that when someone says 1 billion. So I usually like starting my conversations like this, because I feel strongly about people taking what's not theirs. If today you are to get a job or to inherit some wealth from someone, and every second you are given 1 shilling. At the end of the week, at the end of the day, you would have some, I think it's 80,000 bob in your pocket. At the end of the week, you would have 600,000. At the end of the month, you would be one of the top earners in Nairobi. You would be earning 2.6 million. But this is the surprising part. That may not be surprising, but this is the surprising part. For you, if you do not use your salary, and all of your income is saved somewhere in a bank, it will take you 32 years to make 1 billion shillings. Sorry, I just needed to start with that, because I feel very strongly about this word that we usually throw around, corruption. So whenever I like, kind of like giving graphic examples of what it means to take that large amount of money.
So if somebody steals $1 billion, somebody would have worked all those years and never. Okay, I get it.
Never, and yeah, so like 32 years of life. So you've taken just like that and put it in your pocket. Okay, now back to the Nairobi story. While I say that my sense of anchorship to Nairobi, I feel, is because of the people who have been here before me. My grandmother, who was a teacher in 1915 in the central province, then came to Nairobi with her husband. They started a home in the 1926. I personally grew up in an estate where in Jamhuri Estate, for those who know, it's in the borderline. It's like Lavington on one side and Kibera on the other. So I experienced, we didn't have, for example, there were 2 levels of houses. I was in the flats, and those were city council housing. And because of the water pressure, and that used to be distributed in the maishonettes around us, they had water. And I remember we even got into an agreement with a friend. I used to shower in their place. And when we had no water, we used to get tapped water from the from pipes that used to, I think, the illegal connections that were made in Kibera. So we used to get our water by carrying jerry cans from Kibera. You see, at the time, for me, I used to be like, oh, my friends can see me. I didn't know that it is not the way that life is, but I could see clearly that my friends just here next to me who are in a maisonette, they take baths, and the concept of a bathtub, all of these things that were not, I had not really immersed myself. But even as now coming to today, the one thing that I appreciate and is that I'm lucky because I have been able to also live in Kibera, but now you're living in Kibera and studying in Westlands. So in those things where you don't know which is your identity, do you say where you live or where you go to school? You understand? So in those two places, and now in my professional life as a creative, trying to find how do you communicate certain things when you're at home or when you're at work, and whether people understand where you're coming from, and you know that in the office that there is all of these. I worked at 14 Riverside one time, and I had the Boda Boda guy come in with me. So I asked him, please, it's a Friday and we have been working together for a long time. Please, let's walk into the Dusit Hotel and let's have a drink. I remember Yani, the sense of agitation where he felt that I do not belong here. This is not part of where of my existence. So it's just that kind of everywhere. It seems to me that the sense of belonging, but to different places. And then there's the inertia where my mom explained to me that she used to take a bus from KU to Jamhuri Estate where I was born. And it used to take 2 hours to get there using that one number 5 bus. And when I calculate it today, by today's standards, that's almost the same, in that while there has been a lot of development, we have seen roads passing up, down, and all of this, it still takes me 2 hours that it did someone in 1985. So what has all that stuff helped? Is it for me, or is it someone who has a different way of moving? So it's just those things of, while I know that I belong because of the people who have been there before, I don't feel that it's like I'm constantly being told this is not for you, but I still struggle. I'm like clinging on, as Carol has mentioned. You're always like, you're clinging on to this wild ride bull that's trying to kick you off. That's me and Nairobi.
So I want to ask Zane, and because I know he's listening to you, to just bring the thoughts together in terms of, so what do we need to do? How do, even the idea of let's come together, let's dream, let's have conversations and dream about a new Just City. Before I do that, I wonder if each of you could probably, two sentences, 3 sentences. So if that's where you started from, what is the focus of your passion today? What are you doing to change, to say, this is what I want to give Nairobi? This is the difference I intend to make, and this is how I'm doing it. I know, Carol, I know you've already mentioned that you've started a trust. Msingi Trust is about looking at that with the faith communities. But maybe you could say how, like, yeah, so what does that mean? Does that mean you just go and talk to faith communities and say, okay, guys, you need to be involved in justice? What does it look like? What does your work look like? What does it translate into? Abu, I'm going to start with you. And, this could be on a personal level, this could be on an institutional level, but what is it that you as a Nairobian is doing to change that city?
Thank you. So what I've seen is my career path has been one which forces me to do something for, of course, Nairobians and Kenyans as a whole. So my life has been in social justice, community-based work. And of course, currently with where I'm working with over here, my game plan is very clear that 2 things here, that we have a framework which can give us a just city and a just country. Okay, so what can I do to ensure that as many people as possible are aware of this framework and they can get
Abubakar, have I lost you?
in area, for example.
Sorry, we lost you
yeah.
briefly. If you just repeat after you said we have a just framework, I think you meant the constitution, then we lost you.
Yes, okay. Yeah, in summary, what I'm saying is that my game plan is that we have good legislation, good frameworks, which can help us get the justice we want as a country and also as a city. So what's a good way to ensure that as many people as possible are aware about this framework and they can take advantage of it and now actually aspire to get a better life. So that's one of my ways of doing something for Nairobi. Maybe because it was 3 words, I'll stop there.
So hold on. So you do this by actually talking to people and helping them use those frameworks. That the tools are there. People need to engage with them more.
Engage with them more, yeah. Access them. You know, even make these frameworks available to them. You know, yeah. That's what I do.
Thank you very much, Carol.
So with Msingi, we create content on faith, activism, justice, and advocacy. We create content that we use for trainings, we use for engagement with the community. We've trained quite a number of, before COVID, we've done a number of trainings where we engage with pastors, HRDs, and community members on their role as justice champions and justice agents together for the well-being of communities. So the bringing together of HRDs, activists, and pastors around the same table, people who generally always look at each other suspiciously because in one occasion or another, they have burnt each other. And so has been very helpful and very insightful. I remember this training I did in Dandora, where after the training, the people who are market sellers, they called the chief for a meeting and they mobilized for street lighting for market lighting to happen. And they are what you would say non-activist people, but when you show people, especially faith groups, that justice is core to their faith, then it changes how they engage with the world and with each other and with the scripture. Then we host conversations on Facebook. Mshai and Abubakar Zain have been on my podcast, Msingi Talks, where it's basically hosting conversations on faith, justice, and advocacy. And then, which so far, we started in September and we've had over 20,000 people listening to our conversation. So, and what that has done is it creates an opportunity for conversations that people would not have generally to have them, but also it makes us question a lot of our belief system, especially around the city, around the country, around the politics that we espouse and why we espouse them, because we talk about difficult things, and then we make connections. We bring people together on the table who would never ideally sit together because of differing worldviews, but then you sit down and realize that at the heart of it all, you want the good of the city. So how do we, even with differing viewpoints, how do we find how do we find a point of convergence about the city? And then I've seen very amazing connections being made of who I don't even talk to each other, but then they are working for the city. Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. And Mike, as you answer that question, I just remember the comment Margaret made right at the beginning when she talked about artists and artists wondering how do we plug in, and yet we know that they've been very critical. I wonder if you could also just say something briefly about that.
Okay. Thank you. I think professionally, in terms of the work that and especially the platform that I've been given by FES-Kenya through the Elephant, is just the ability to illustrate things in a different way. I think images have always been powerful, but I think the platform is even more powerful when people actually get to see it. And to work with people at Inuka who have given you a platform, not only for self-expression of what, but also of themes that can't be accessed. So it's always important that I do that to my level best to make sure that that the voices of the people who know are heard by the people they want to reach. So it's just those things of access. Sometimes you find opportunities are missed because people didn't know that something. They didn't know that they didn't know, which is a different level. So I like being that the medium. But also on a personal level, initially, like here, we live next to a mosque, and for me, it always puzzled me that even young people who used to go to the mosque, but it was dark. So I started installing, I connected them to my network, started putting to illuminate those so that people can start going to the mosque. Although, yeah, KPLC came later and told me that it was not my job to light everywhere. And but in small ways, I found out that you can make things more comfortable for people. And initially, I wanted to do that whole estate management thing until I got into problems with KPLC, and I was later sued by the security company. But now, in terms of me as a person, I am really trying that thing of everyone, putting them in across that divide. What I inherited as a child is that I belong everywhere, and there is no one that can tell me not to go into a place. And so I also try and help people in the community, and especially people I interact with. Let us go to this other place, and putting people in uncomfortable spaces across. So bringing some of my friends, and we are going to buy fishing in the market in Kisundogo. Those kind of things. So that is me on a personal level. But in terms of the creatives and the creative spaces, I still feel that one big thing that we would really benefit from is that strength of collaborative thinking. Because I feel like if there was if I was to sit down with a musician and me with my art and kind of like create something together, then I think would be able to duplicate our small individual voices. And I like spaces like the corner space, spaces where people can come together, collaborate, and make their voices bigger, which is why I really appreciate now spaces like the Orator, where the people come together and to make bigger things.
Thank you, Mike. And I asked you that because often people feel that there are professions where people don't work in groups or organizations. So you've got the individuals and also individual people who say, I don't want to have to organize, to join a big group. How do I plug in as an individual? How do I do something as an individual? I know we're almost coming to an end of this conversation, which really was about getting us to get a sense of how much, even whether an individual or an organization, how much you can do to change the city. I'm going to ask Zain for some thoughts and comments. And Zain, the thing that's really striking me as I'm listening to everybody is this idea of working with others, coming together with people whom you don't normally work with and finding ways of doing things together. And I wonder if you could start to wrap that all up for us. And then I have a couple of questions in the chat and the Q&A, and I'd like to put that to the team before we close. So Zain?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Thank you everyone for your comments and thoughts. Just to contextualize what we have been doing, is that we've been working on building transformative scenarios for a just city 50 years into the future. And a number of things that came out of this process. One, that we had an amazing mix of Nairobians and people who do not consider Nairobi as their first county. You know, the people who talk about, I'm going back home, and Nairobi is just a house. A team of people who are born here, they only know Nairobi, the team of people who work here. So it was an interesting exercise, because a transformative scenario building exercise is not a prediction of the future. It is exploration of possible futures that can happen to Nairobi, also depending on our input or our imagination of what the future will look like and what kind of complications may arise out of this. It was a very intensive process, but in the end, we came up with 4 stories: a brown story, a purple story, a red story, and a green story. So when some of the members, including Bastian, was talking about a particular story, that is the context. And I'm sure Dr. Mshai will share with you a link. I don't know how many spaces are remaining. There's going to be a performance of these stories this coming Friday at the French Cultural Center, Alliance Française. And these stories will come alive through performance, through storytelling. As we are from Orecha Collective, we are using a methodological approach which focused on Orecha. And now these stories will be coming up alive. I would like just to make 3 points in terms of what you said, Daktari. Our struggles, if you look at the history of the struggles of people in Kenya and in our continent and elsewhere, it always takes working together to build a critical mass to bring radical change that is required. So working together is an amazing concept. I see Dr. Mshai has already put on the chart the link to the registration. I hope there are a few spaces remaining for those who are in Nairobi this Friday evening. So the issue of people working together is critical to transformation. Secondly, I think sometimes we work so much and then we feel that we are not making enough progress. But for those who have lived long enough in our country, in other words, fairly elderly people like myself, you will recall that we come from a very bad place, and we've made tremendous steps in transforming our lives. The reintroduction of multi-party politics in Kenya within the concept of the Saba Saba is a milestone, and leading up to continued resistance and agitation for a new constitution. So we have it now. And the greatest challenge we have for this generation is to actualize the aspirations and the values that we have adopted ourselves into our own constitution and continue to transform ourselves. So 10 years down the line, there are a lot of changes in Nairobi, some bad, many positive. And if you go to communities, you'll see some of the results of the work people are undertaking themselves. Last but not least, is something that has been put on the chart by Paddy Onyango, our elder brother. We call him elder. That yes, but how do we link this good work being done in Nairobi to the national platform, to national policy, to national direction? I think we do this by, elder brother, by reclaiming our city one by one. And many of the people who are talking here are people who are working in other cities and towns and also rural areas. So cumulatively, we need to put together all our struggles together and work with each other. Like many of the people who talked here about networking, about citizen agency, and about sharing our lessons that we have learned that have worked in one community which we can try in another community, that have worked in one city that we can try in another city, and also contextualizing it with the conditions of that city. So I'd like to stop there so that you can have an opportunity to engage with those who have faithfully stayed with us from the beginning. And also to finally comment that I have noticed that, for example, I'm very happy to know that our comrades in Kisumu managed to hold the Saba Saba celebrations and reflections without bad behavior from the police. Yet here in Nairobi, the more things change, the more they remain the same. So there are some people whose mindset has not changed at all. And these people, we need to work with them because they are our brothers and sisters. When I say these people, it's not to castigate them, but we say we must hold people to account, but we must work with them and say, Kenya has changed. We are no longer in the first instant of Saba Saba. There are many Saba Sabas have come and gone, and many changes we have embraced, but there are some people who still want to take us back. Thank you, Daktari.
Thank you very much, Zain. And you know, you've brought several thoughts that I just want to put out there. Number one is that we need to think about the city today and the changes for today, but we also need to think about the city for the future. The performance that Zain is talking about and the process that people went through is about Nairobi in 2070. What would Nairobi look like? And what is it that we can do today to take us there? I'm struck by something that Carol said when she talked about one of the images that stays in her mind is of Timothy Njoya. And Timothy Njoya and those of his time who did what they did it so that we could be in the Nairobi of today. That problematic as it is better than the time, you know, of what happened then. The other image that comes to mind is also of Njonjo Mue kneeling at, I think it's Freedom Corner. You know, people have put their lives on their line so that we could be where we are today, as we said at the very beginning. What is it that we are going to do today to take us so that in 2070 or the year 3000, the Nairobians of that time will look back to this time and say, those guys did whatever they were supposed to do, and that's what's brought us over here. But let me quickly come. I want to pick up on the question that Paddy asked, and thank you, Zain, for starting us off. I'd like to ask anybody in the panel, any of you who would like to respond to that, before I read out that question by Paddy. Kerubo Abuya says, appreciates Margaret for pointing out that people in communities already have capacity and what is often required in the facilitation of leadership processes within the community to enable participatory action. And she also really appreciated the comment on the humane aspects of working with communities, Utu in action. So let me take you to the question that Zain has begun answering, which is the question by Paddy. And Paddy Onyango asked about how is this good work? How is it being linked with national policy processes, which sometimes these processes negate the principle of a just city. Zain has already begun to respond to that. Would any of you also want to answer to that? That we have policy that's ongoing, but sometimes how do we link what we're talking about to that kind of policy? Abubakar, Carol, Margaret, Bastian, Mike, any of you wants to respond? You all don't have to respond, but if anybody does want to. Abubakar, I have my eye on you, but you don't have to answer.
No, it's okay. I've seen Bastian hands up, so I'm giving him a chance. Bastian can go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I hope I'm audible. I switched to my cell phone. I'm stuck in beautiful Nairobi traffic, so my response will be rather short. But since I admire the elder Paddy, I'd like to respond. I would say it's a bottom-up approach, and as I've said, the urban struggles are already shaping political identity of the younger generation, of the not so young generation, and therefore I would say sooner or later, elections or political, at the end of the day, it will hopefully be about elections. Elections will be won or lost in cities. And that is something I would say the ruling class, the ruling elite has to take into consideration if they think about their own future. So my sense or my piece of responding to the question would be, at the end of the day, it's a bottom-up process. And it's going to take a bit of time. I think Zain has said it. We have to do it one by one. But the more people move into cities and the more their political identity will be formed by those struggles, by the lack of services, I sincerely hope that they will make sure that this will lead to political change. Through elections, of course. Please don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I can.
That's a great comment in terms of we can't deliver on services if we don't think about governance and think about the politics of the city, because that ultimately will affect what happens in terms of service delivery. Abubakar Said?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mishai. Maybe just three quick things. One, it may appear it's repetitive, but for me, I still believe the spaces which are available in our legislation. So, for example, in terms of the public participation and what it can do. So, for example, when you look at the issue of devolution and specifically the Public Finance Act, two acts, Public Finance Act and the Urban Areas and Cities Act, especially the Urban Areas and Cities Act, which regulates the participation of citizens in urban planning, for example. It's there, but how many citizens really are aware of its potency and how to use it? So again, for me, I believe is we make sure this information is available in a simple way and people will engage. Secondly, I'm also seeing, especially where now an organization like yours, the Orator Collective comes in, the things which are driving people like us, but maybe we are at the lower level. What was this which made Wangari Maathai be that mad to allow her hair to be plucked out just because of a forest? What was that awakening? So I think we need to work on the awakening so that we have as many Wangari Maathais as possible, so that they have that drive really, because I think that in an urban area, the issue of selfishness grows. I don't know what is it with urban issues that makes people a little bit selfish in a way. So I think that's an area we may want to look at. And of course, the role of technology and its immense potential, which can now also help the aspect of citizen agency, that I can mobilize, I can network, I can empower, or we can do a lot of things in a very simple way, cost-effective way, and still reach masses. I can network with other countries in the East, in the West, to get more ideas. So I see that as a cocktail of potential things which you can do to help link what you're doing on the ground with policy for a just city. Thank you.
Okay, I will ask these last two questions and then ask all of you to make your final comments as we come. I know we've been on for about 2 hours. And I think the questions bring us back to where we started with the concept of Saba Saba, with John Namae asking, have we as Kenyans forgotten Saba Saba? And then Juliet Atela says, why is Saba Saba not commemorated as a public holiday, just like Madaraka or Jamhuri Day? And how can other generations, such as Gen Z, get to learn more about this day? So really taking us full circle, what do we do with Saba Saba? How do we remember it? Not just mentally, but in terms of making sure that the next generation is invested and does something about taking it forward. So I'm going to go to all of you for closing remarks. Maybe I'll start with Margaret, then Bastian, Abubakar, Said, Carol, Mike, and then Zain. So Margaret.
Thank you, Mshai. I think to respond to Juliet, what we can do about Saba Saba, I think for those of us who know something about Saba Saba, ensure that whoever is around you knows that something about Saba Saba. So it's just to ask ourselves, what is your Saba Saba concept and how are you gonna implement it? I think for me, I would pose that as a challenge. But I think for me to wrap it up, a just city for me is a place that values humanity, a place where everyone is recognized, appreciated, and valued simply because they are human beings. And then a city that values, where values are lived and experienced, as opposed to simply being documented and talked about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And I don't remember who I said should go next. Was it Bastian or Carol? Whichever of you is ready. Carol, do you want to go next?
I could. For me, Saba Saba is remembered. And the reason why it can't be a public holiday because it's a reminder of a continuous protest. And so we need to make it in our own homes, in our own institutions. I just think that every CBO, NGO, every organization that's working in the community, when it's Saba Saba, we just need to stop and commemorate it as we are doing now, because it's one of the reasons why we're here. The government will not make it a national holiday, and especially because as per the constitutions, we have gazetted public holidays. But more so, the reason why right now, many friends of mine who are on the streets today have been arrested because they do not, the society, the government does not want dissent. And I love, someone said in the morning that, where is it? I wrote something about, I've forgotten about what it was, but it was something around dissent and why it is important to disagree with what the government is doing. And so Saba Saba will not be mainstreamed because we want to always agree with what the government is doing. For me, the reason we keep doing this is, and the beauty of this conversation and why we're doing this is that it reminds you that you're not alone, that there's everybody here who's pulling from one end, doing this work, and conversations like this, planners, actors who sometimes feel very tired. But having these conversations like this allow us to know that the struggle for justice is communal. It is personal, but it also has the communal level to it. So I am grateful and thankful that we are able to have these conversations. We are able to pull on our strengths and to work together for a just city. Can I also just add that when we did the Just City scenario project, when we started actually imagining what 2070 would look like, it was very hard. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done to imagine Nairobi in 2070, and based on the history of what has happened in the past 70 years. But what that means is that the next 70 years, 2070 and beyond, can be anything we make it to be right now. We have the ability to change Nairobi for my great-grandchildren or our great-grandchildren. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Carol. That is so true. We do have that ability. Bastian?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the question of whether and how the Saba Saba Day should become a public holiday in Kenya is slightly beyond my powers. So therefore I'd skip that. But for me, the whole, not only, but especially Saba Saba Day should be about education, academic education, school education, whether it's primary, secondary, or tertiary, but also education through arts and through exchanges within your own or somebody else's family, intergenerational exchange. So I would say education definitely has to play a key role in making sure that it's on the one hand passed from one generation to the other, but it to me, and I'm still quite new to the Kenyan society, it looks like that the Saba Saba Day has something to do with the soul of the Kenyan society. And therefore, one of the methods of making sure that it's not forgotten and that it plays the role that it needs to play can be and should be education. And with regards to the Just City, I think Zain has said it, or one of my panelists mentioned it. For me, a just city or a city is just if it's more about the people, the city dwellers, the current ones or the future ones, than it is about things, making them smart, making them more efficient. So it's less about the market and it's more about human beings. That, from my perspective, would make cities already more just.
Thank you very much, Bastian. We have to think about cities being about people, not about things. Mike Kobole?
So thank you for that. I think when the day happened, I remember being instructed very categorically, wherever you go, do not dare do a two-finger salute. Whatever it is you think it is happening, don't put your fingers up, even if it's 3 fingers, because living right next to Kibra, that was actually punishable by even violence. So even it was meted out to small children. So I quickly understood that my voice has some power in some way. So that, but my participation in whatever is happening is not appreciated. I think Bastian has said something powerful there, that rather than having a day where you look like the dissenting voice, the crazy man shouting in the street, and I'm sorry to say that, I say that very carefully, knowing that today people have been incarcerated because of presenting a view that is contrary to what the system believes. But I feel like if Saba Saba was a mindset that could be introduced, a movement that could, be, injected into our education system, where it could be present as a force that is always, kind of like constantly informing some of the decisions that are then moved into actions, that by the day that we are actually celebrating the day, the Saba Saba, it's no longer now just a public holiday, but it's, kind of a place where we can reassess and see how far have we moved away from the order that is created for us. That's, kind of not being in parity, but slowly moving away from what has been instilled. So it's, again, education is a powerful way, and also just, kind of like aligning all of these efforts and, building upon them, even the creative, the creative equivalent of a presentation. It should have a Saba Saba-esque kind of theme, and it should actually keep being, presented, and so that it now grows in people's mind that your voice has power, and it should never be choked. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mike. I like that thought that makes Saba Saba more than a day. It becomes a movement, even a mindset about that we carry with ourselves wherever we go. Abubakar Said.
Thank you. Yeah, I think my ideas evaporated, but I agree with all the panelists. I was thinking also maybe Saba Saba can also be sort of course, we can celebrate it. We can celebrate it as a festival, for example, which a festival, and also more importantly, we use it as a space for us a scorecard, a platform where we score our political struggles, so that every Saba Saba, every year, we will be checking where are we as far as our political rights are concerned. What is our, how we performed? Just to add on top of what my colleagues have said. And then my idea for a just city, again, it's also a city where we have space for everyone to live a good life, a life of dignity in their own context. Okay, according to my own understanding, according to my means of livelihood, I
Okay, I think we might have lost Abubakar, but I think we got the gist of what he was saying. And this sense of an investment on Okay, that I thought he had come back, on being able to carry this forward to the next, not just the next generation, but even today, to make it really, really practical, so that every year we see the progress that we have made. I don't know if he'll come back and he'll be able to complete that thought, but in the meantime, Abubakar Zain.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mshai. Two quick things. I think the whole question of why don't we remember Saba Saba and its contribution to the struggle for a more just Kenya is important. But I would like to give a context and say it is important to also have memorialization of other important processes and memories that we need to keep and pass on to ourselves and to the next generation. For example, the struggle culminating in people surrounding the police station, in the central police station, and the Nyanjiru story and the other important actors in the struggle for independence. People don't know why it is called Ofafa, why that neighborhood is called Ofafa, why people don't know why a certain street is called Mwindumbingu in town. So this question of memorialization is critical to our processes. Secondly, what we did in our constitution, Article 9, 3, 4, and 5, we constitutionalized 3 important celebrations. That is Madaraka Day and also Jamhuri Day. But also, more importantly, we changed Kenyatta Day to Mashujaa Day, so that it could be encompass the all freedom fighters and all heroes and heroines that we have had in our history. But we have put a provision where it says that Parliament may enact another national day. So we could start a petition to Parliament to make Saba Saba a day of memory. But let me finish by saying, Daktari, I know we are pressed for time, but we also live in a season of COVID. And what this season of COVID have exposed, not only of Nairobi and many other unjust cities, on the level of inequalities that we have, and how those impact the majority of our people. For example, when you say washing of hands and use of sanitation and water is important, we realize many parts of Nairobi don't have water at all. So the level of unemployment that have grown in this city, the level of violence that has increased as a consequence, this calls us to action. And I can't talk more about action than everybody else in this panel. So thank you very much, everybody, for all the work you're doing. And let's continue this good work. We can't give up. This is a calling for a lifetime. Thank you, Daktari.
Well, I want to thank everybody. This has been, I did not believe how fast the 2 hours went by, but I just want to appreciate really, really very much everybody who's joined in as part of the conversation, those who have been listening along on YouTube or here in the Zoom webinar, particularly those of you who've asked questions or put comments. Those have been very useful, and we'll continue to think and talk about them. I really, really want to thank every one of our panelists who have spoken from their hearts as Nairobians, who work with organizations, but also who just are invested not only in this city, but in the world that we live in, and who have urged us to begin by thinking about what justice looks like, feels like, is experienced by the people in the communities where we live. For those of you who feel that it is too big to get involved in the big national matters, just start with where you are. And I especially thank our panelists for giving us some real practical ideas about where to start, reminding us that it starts from the experiences that start as even when we are children. So let's not leave our children behind in these conversations. Engage the children around you, find out what experiences they're going through, expose them to this history, expose them to the realities, take them to different parts of the city or the community where you live, and let's together create the Nairobi, the Kenya, the city or community where we live and make it a better place. I want to thank Kwamcheti Makoha, who gave us the article Saba Saba and the Evolution of Citizen Power, with which we began, which is a reflection on Saba Saba Day and its history and where we are at the present. And you can find that on the elephant. I thank Alan, who's been keeping us all online, and Inuka Nisisi very much for creating this space, this Saba Saba Day. We celebrate and just want to thank every single Kenyan who's put their life, their limb, themselves online on that first Saba Saba Day and on any other day, as Zane reminded us, that there's a wide history of people who have done that up to this present day, even those today who've taken to the streets or who are having conversations like this or doing things to keep Saba Saba Day alive.
And for me, it is just to thank everyone and to say to everyone that we are so very grateful. And if I don't know if Shai had finished the thought, but let me read it for you again. I think that there is an imagination problem. I see this tug of war between us as citizens. Those of us who have imagined something better and see the constitution as a path to that, socio-economic, political, it's not just aspirational. We are looking for tangible things as well. And then the people who are holding on, and you see that friction, both at an individual and at institutional level, there's a lack of imagination to see that. For some of us, this is an opportunity. So Marilyn Kamuru was reflecting in a webinar and gave those thoughts. So Shai, I think, wanted to close with those thoughts. And I would like to really thank all the participants who stayed for long 2 hours, for more than 2 hours in this webinar. And we know that today we had very many different activities celebrating Saba Saba, but we thank you for spending Saba Saba with us. And we hope some of you will get time to join us in the performance at the French Cultural Center, Alliance Française, on Friday, and that you may have had an opportunity to register, because because of COVID conditions was limited to a number of people. So thank you very much, and goodbye.